out are now available to the public. We are about to uncover the truth behind these classified documents. Find out what the government doesn't want you to know. Alien files, unsealed. Exposing the biggest secret on planet Earth. In 1975, UFO sightings spike in all corners of North America, many near military installations.
It's documented that unidentified craft were getting into restricted air zones, even above nuclear installations.
Who or what is entering restricted airspace? And what is the U.S. military doing to stop it? Unsealed case file, the Wurtsmith incident. Oscoda, Michigan, October 30th, 1975. On the shores of Lake Huron, civilian and military personnel witness strange lights in the sky.
In 1975, in Wurtsmith Air Force Base, there was an incident that was described as unidentified craft being seen outside of this military installation that shouldn't have been there. And so they had a tanker in the air that went to go check it out to try and see and determine what this craft was.
But as the tanker approaches the unidentified craft, something extraordinary happens.
There were very bright lights, but when the military tried to fly towards them, they switched off in sync.
As the tanker apparently approached these objects, they did confirm it, not only visually, but they confirmed it by radar. So whatever was there was actually there.
Despite visual and radar confirmation, the Wurtsmith incident, like many of its kind, would have remained hidden from the public without the Freedom of Information Act. Officials dismissed the incident as lights from an Apache helicopter, but the report leaves more questions than answers.
Was it truly a helicopter? Or was that just simply the label and the best definition that they could put on the craft?
Cases like the Wurtsmith incident mark an important change in the way UFOs are studied and reported inside the government. But to understand why, we must go back nearly a decade. Unsealed case file, the Condon Report.
In 1966, Edward Condon led what has now become known as the Condon Committee. And what they were doing was analyzing what the cases were that were still unidentified in the Blue Book system. And in 22 years, they investigated 12,768 sightings. Only 701 of those remained unidentified.
But many critics argue the Condon Committee's findings are a foregone conclusion.
His final conclusions in that report were that UFOs were nothing to be bothered with, nothing to be in, and his other conclusion was that from 1947 till 1968, when it was released, no scientific information, nothing of importance could be gleaned from the subject of UFOs.
In 1969, the US government terminated Project Blue Book and said, we are no longer interested in investigating UFO sightings.
There's something to this phenomena that the intelligence community knows is important, but doesn't want us to know about.
In 1969, the U.S. government shut down their official Air Force investigation called Project Blue Book, claiming that studying UFOs has added nothing to scientific advancement. But by the mid-1970s, public interest in UFOs is only getting stronger. And one incident in 1976 shocked civilians and the military to their core. Unsealed case file, the Tehran incident. Tehran, Iran, September 19th, 1976.
In September of 1976, in the middle of Tehran, Iran, an airbase there was receiving quite a few phone calls about a mysterious object that was seen hovering over the city.
Iranian Air Force generals scrambled 2 American-made F-4 Phantom fighter jets to intercept. But just as the first pilot realizes that the object is unlike anything he has ever seen before, his controls mysteriously shut down. He is called back to base, and the second F-4 takes a closer look.
As it got the same amount of distance as the first plane, something different happened. A second UFO appeared from the first one. Then all of a sudden, the second UFO jetted forward towards the incoming F-4 Phantom jet. So the next thing that he does as he arms his aim-for missile, flips the switch, and he's going to fire back. He goes to fire in 3, 2, 1, everything shuts off. He has no control over the fire. He sees an incoming object, and he can't do a thing.
The pilot fears for his life and takes evasive action, throwing his plane into a dive.
As he's seeing this object come towards him, again assuming it was a missile, before it impacts his craft, it makes a dip, it loops around his aircraft, and rejoins the original UFO, as pretty much to say, I don't think so, don't even try it.
The UFOs maneuver in a way that defy any known aircraft capabilities of the time.
There was actually a third UFO that appeared as the pilot saw it come out of the side of the original craft, then goes towards Earth and actually lands on the ground. It says to have cast a large light, about 1/3 of a kilometer in diameter, on the ground.
American officers are secretly dispatched to Tehran, where they conduct a lengthy interview with the Iranian pilots, officers, and air control personnel. The report is sent to top-level agencies within the U.S. government.
I've never seen a UFO document be forwarded that widely. The CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and again, even the White House received a copy of this report.
Why does the U.S. government take such an intense interest in the Tehran incident, 7 years after the Air Force said that studying UFOs does not further scientific knowledge?
Obviously, if a UFO can disable a fighter jet in Tehran, it can do it in the United States. Does the government take it seriously? Absolutely.
This proves beyond a doubt that the UFO phenomena was real. This proves beyond a doubt that they were still interested in it. And this proves beyond any doubt that this was technology that we don't even have today, decades later.
Experts today still cannot explain the Tehran incident.
But the most fascinating part to me is not necessarily the case itself, but it's the fact that we can read it. If you couple this case and you put it next to the hundreds and hundreds of blacked out cases on UFOs that are blacked out from top to bottom, if you could read this one, what in the heck is under the black in this one?
Encounters such as the Tehran incident raise questions about how much the government may be hiding from the public. In 1977, a leading independent UFO researcher named William Spaulding files a lawsuit against the CIA for violating the Freedom of Information Act.
Spaulding, like a lot of people in the UFO community, was fairly suspicious of the government, and he didn't believe it.
So he pushed and pushed until finally it went to a lawsuit, and the CIA was forced by order of a judge to look for records.
The court forces the CIA to release thousands of pages of UFO files, files they officially claimed did not exist.
William Spaulding's 1977 lawsuit marked a fundamental change in how the UFO community used the Freedom of Information Act to go after this issue aggressively. This was such a huge embarrassment that the then director of the CIA asked his own officials in a panicked memo, "Are we in UFOs?"
CIA, Department of Defense, and United States Air Force documents reveal that in 1975, reliable military personnel repeatedly witnessed UFOs over weapons storage areas and nuclear missile facilities. Among the UFO incidents listed in the declassified files is the Wurtsmith sighting.
Why is it that military personnel are always told, don't talk about what you saw to anybody? And the answer is obvious. If you're trying to deliver a message to the public that these things are nothing to worry about, you don't want your employees going around talking about them like they're real.
Unsealed case file, the Rendlesham Forest incident. December 1980.
The Rendlesham Forest UFO incident took place in December 1980 in the United Kingdom, but involved 2 United States Air Force bases. These were actually 2 of the most important and sensitive bases in the entire NATO military alliance. And this was a time of great tension in the Cold War.
For 3 nights at the twin Air Force bases RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, witnesses investigate a remarkable close encounter.
And on the first night, of what was actually 3 nights of consecutive activity. This UFO landed. Security, police, and law enforcement personnel in the military went out and encountered a small triangular craft which had landed in a clearing.
One of the airmen gets close enough to report seeing strange symbols on the side of the UFO and even claims to touch the craft.
After a while, it rose slowly up above the ground, it cleared the tops of the trees, and it accelerated away at immense speed.
On the 3rd night, Deputy Base Commander Colonel Charles Halt joins the investigation.
He threw together a small team of military, and he went out into the forest, in his own words, to debunk this UFO nonsense and to put this whole ridiculous story to bed for once and for all.
But nothing could prepare Colonel Halt for what he was about to see.
Over a period of some hours, saw extraordinary activity in the sky, including an object which fired a pencil-thin beam of light down at his feet. During his own sighting, it was his habit to carry with him a small handheld cassette recorder on which he documented his observations. This we have on audio tape, and that tape has survived.
The tape, recorded by Colonel Halt during the encounter, is considered one of the most compelling pieces of UFO evidence in history.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground.
Taken collectively, the Rendlesham Forest incident is the most compelling, best evidenced, and I think significant UFO incident in the world.
But the significance goes far beyond eyewitness accounts.
There was indeed both a Royal Air Force and a NATO report that the radar establishments did indeed have an uncorrelated target.
And they measured the radiation at this site, and the radiation had spiked. There's radiation where it shouldn't be, at the edge of a forest. Why?
After the incident, Halt makes an official report to the UK Ministry of Defence, a seminal document now known as the Halt Memo.
It's an extraordinary document. It's got this very low-key title, Unexplained Lights. When you actually read the thing, it talks quite clearly about a landed metallic craft and about the physical evidence in terms particularly of the radioactivity levels. There is absolutely no doubt that these documents are the government's own investigation of this.
So did the Rendlesham incident actually occur? Yes, it absolutely did occur. Multiple witnesses. We had an object on the ground. We had radiation. We had the deputy commander of the base involved who actually saw it.
Despite the compelling evidence, the UK military concludes that the Rendlesham Forest sightings are an optical illusion. But 20 years later, under mounting public pressure, the UK government commissions an in-depth study of many UFO sightings across the country. Unsealed case file, the Condign Report.
Project Condign was a UK government intelligence study into the UFO phenomenon. The final report was stamped secret UK eyes only.
The Condign Report tries to answer questions that have lingered since the Cold War. Could UFO sightings be Soviet technology? Are they our own top-secret black projects? Or is it really just atmospheric anomalies?
One of the other fascinating things is that it actually dropped the term UFO and replaced it with UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. So when we use phrases like UAP, it steers people almost away from a nuts and bolts interpretation that we're dealing with solid, structured craft. And it focuses the debate on, for example, exotic atmospheric plasmas, which was one of the Project Condign conclusions.
Declassified documents prove that government agencies have been investigating UFOs long after they claim to no longer be interested in the phenomena. But when it comes to disclosure, the National Security Agency looks like it has come to the end of the line.
The National Security Agency has really shifted towards kind of more of the spying role. They're the ones that go out and try and figure out what the other enemies of the United States of America are actually doing.
According to John Greenwald, the NSA has admitted it hasn't been keeping its records in good order.
Under the Freedom of Information Act, you can request what's called a mandatory
review 100% of all UFO records that the NSA has released.
After waiting a considerable amount of time, the National Security Agency told me under the Freedom of Information Act that they lost 1%.
What kind of secret is so compelling that even the documents pertaining to its existence have been erased?
Having done this job from the inside, I've met a number of people, politicians, military officers, intelligence community personnel, who are absolutely convinced that some UFOs do indeed involve visitation of extraterrestrial spacecraft and indeed entities.
If it takes 30, 40, 50 years for these secrets to be declassified, it's possible that our children, our grandchildren, will see a whole new batch of evidence come to light.
Have governments made contact with an extraterrestrial being? And if they have, why are they keeping it a secret? Since the early 1960s, we've experimented with how to travel off planet Earth. We've been to the moon, landed rovers on Mars, and sent probes beyond the edge of our solar system. To establish a permanent presence in space, we developed the International Space Station. To service the space station and resupply it with food, experimental equipment, but in 1986, something happened that men will never forget. January 28, 1986. The Space Shuttle Challenger is launched on a routine mission. But 73 seconds into the flight, something goes terribly wrong. An O-ring seal on one of its rocket boosters fails at liftoff. This leads to a breach of the shuttle's external gas tank. The massive aerodynamic forces acting on the shuttle as it escapes Earth's atmosphere expands the breach, and the result is a catastrophic failure. The Challenger disintegrates off Florida's coast above Cape Canaveral. 7 crew members die. The Challenger accident is a brutal reminder of the hazards of space travel and makes many in the aeronautical industry rethink the way we travel into space. The incident is also a defining blow to a top-secret group in the American space industry. Less than 2 years after the Challenger accident, an article appears in the New York Times that stuns many insiders.
So in 1989, the New York Times publishes an article that says that we had a cadre of 32 military-trained astronauts and a multi-billion-dollar budget going on for a shuttle program at Vandenberg Air Force Base. It's crazy.
A secret cadre of 32 astronauts who were outside of the normal NASA space program had been axed, and that associated with this various facilities, effectively an entire secret spaceport, were also going to be mothballed.
The article cites the Challenger accident as the key reason the military is getting out of using manned space shuttles.
If we had a multi-billion-dollar military space shuttle program going on in Los Angeles and in Vandenberg, multi-billion-dollar, and we didn't know about it, nobody knew about this thing, what else could our government possibly have going on in space?
Once again, the government finds itself under suspicion.
They could have already had a military space force up there. We really don't know.
When we consider the story about the cutting of 32 astronauts from this covert program, I think there's a temptation to think, well, the program in its entirety has been axed. But in my experience of cuts within government, what actually happens is that a small part of the program is cut out to satisfy the financiers.
So could a Space Force exist? Absolutely. Could we hide it? Could the government hide that secret? Absolutely.
If a Space Force exists, when and why was it created? Unsealed case file. The Twining Memo. July 26, 1947. Less than 3 weeks after the famous UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico, U.S. President Harry Truman signs the most important act of the 20th century, the National Security Act. It leads swiftly to the creation of the CIA, the National Security Council, an independent Air Force, and the Department of Defense. 3 weeks earlier, four-star General Nathan Twining flies unannounced to Kirtland Air Force Base. Many experts believe he arrives to help cover up the Roswell UFO crash.
September 18th, 1947, the CIA is born. 5 days later, the Twining Memo comes out.
Nathan Twining wrote a memo which in many ways perhaps set the scene for what a lot of people claim has followed. And he said in his memo that UFOs were real. They are clearly under intelligent control, and they're often seen in close proximity of highly sensitive military establishments and particularly nuclear facilities. He said, for that reason, this subject must be studied carefully and taken extremely seriously.
The Twining Memo says we need to investigate the technology, but what do you do with that technology if it's real? What does it give you the ability to do? You have propulsion, you have other technologies like night vision and things like that. So what are you naturally going to do with that information? You're going to corral it, you're going to keep it from your enemies, like the Russians or whoever. You're going to get your best scientists on it, and you're going to run with that technology, and what's the next step? You're going to put it in a craft and use it to go somewhere. So Space Force is born.
General Twining may have seen the Roswell crash with his own eyes, but his reaction is to plan a way for America itself to get into space. Evidence may point to the existence of a secret, independent U.S. Space Force. But it's one thing to have a plan, and quite another to put it into action. Unsealed case file. The X-20 Dinosaur.
Starting in 1957, the United States Air Force started developing the X-20 Dinosaur. What this was a defense space plane, so to speak, that was going to have a variety of capabilities, or at least that was the intent.
The Air Force starts the Dinosaur program a year before the creation of NASA. And it has defense, not exploration, on its mind. The X-20 is allegedly developed for a variety of military missions, including satellite maintenance, reconnaissance bombing, space rescue, and as a saboteur of enemy satellites. When NASA is created, the new space agency develops the Mercury space capsules for exploration and ballistic re-entry. But the design of the Air Force's Dinosaur is eerily similar to the modern shuttle. It can allegedly reach Earth orbit at the speed of an intercontinental ballistic missile and return to Earth by gliding down under pilot control. It can land at an airfield instead of deploying a parachute and splashing down in the ocean, like NASA's capsules.
They spent to the tune of $5 billion in today's standards to develop a craft that could fly in space, potentially take out enemy satellites, potentially strike other countries, potentially do reconnaissance work, kind of a wide array of defense capabilities.
But the X-20 Dinosaur is reportedly plagued with design problems. Uncertainty over the development of its experimental booster rocket, which launches it into orbit, slows development to a halt. After a comprehensive program study in 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara says the X-20 Dinosaur did not have any real objectives for orbital flight.
Unfortunately, they really couldn't make the plane. They couldn't build it. and the project was eventually scrubbed.
The Air Force's decision to halt the program is a reversal of its previous policy. But could a secret industry have continued to develop the X-20 behind closed doors? In 2001, a hacker from the UK uncovers evidence that points to something many thought did not exist. Unsealed case file. Non-terrestrial officers.
Gary McKinnon was a computer hacker that allegedly got into NASA computers and discovered much more than he bargained for.
Between 2001 and 2002, UK IT expert Gary McKinnon allegedly gains illegal access to over 50 U.S. agency computer systems, including the secret NASA database.
What he claims to have found when he hacked into NASA computers was a list of non-terrestrial Air Force officers. He claimed that he had found pictures of craft.
He uncovered, according to him, documentation that proved that not only were aliens real, not only was NASA scrubbing out UFOs in their photos, but also that there was this secret space force that existed that could potentially travel to other planets, or that there were military personnel that were currently in space.
He found what he thought were ship names, but instead of being USS Enterprise, it's USS Enterprise, United States Spaceship.
Gary McKinnon alleges that NASA is actively involved in a massive cover-up.
Now, the names of these supposed ships are interesting in themselves, because one of them was apparently the USS Hillencutter. And Hillencutter was one of the people believed to be on the infamous Majestic 12 committee, the super secret body charged with keeping UFOs secret from the public and managing the whole UFO situation.
The problem remains. What exactly did McKinnon really see, and what evidence is being covered up?
So Gary McKinnon's hack really led to the rise of this idea that there is a secret space force, maybe part of a wider shadow government. I've even heard phrases such as a breakaway civilization used for this.
Coming up, we reveal evidence of an ultra-top secret spaceship. Its mission and its 2014 record-breaking flight remain classified. Many experts believe America has operated a secret space force for decades, with ultra-high-tech ships designed for a wide array of space defense capabilities. But what does one of its ships look like? And what is it really capable of? Unsealed case file, the X-37B. April 2010, the X-37B is launched. At less than 30 feet long and just 10 feet tall, the craft is not unlike a miniature space shuttle. Information about its mission is closely guarded. Insiders speculate that NASA and the U.S. Air Force have been secretly funding the project for decades. But the unmanned X-37B is now being developed by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The CIA claims the X-37B is performing secret reconnaissance, while the Air Force alleges that the X-37B's objectives are testing reusable space technologies. But many believe it is being used for other reasons.
Is it possible the program of the 1950s and 1960s that never came to fruition is now flying above our heads with the label the X-37B? With today's defense requirements, I wouldn't put it past them. We're told that the X-37's unmanned. So at this point, with their it is possible that the X-37 could be a small model of a much bigger craft that essentially could carry humans to space, essentially could create a space force that could fend off our enemies from the safety of the cosmos.
The X-37B. In August 2014, it lands after an incredible 627 days in space.
For 2 years, a plane operated by NASA is traversing somewhere out there We have no idea what it's doing. We have no idea what its mission is. What happened in that 2 years?
There are some aspects to the space program that are not being publicly declared.
What exactly is the mission of the X-37B? And are its capabilities limited to the Earth's orbit? Some experts believe the X-37B has the capability to reach the moon or even beyond, leading to speculation that the U.S. may already be developing secret off-world bases.
With the aura of secrecy around the X-37B, we can tell that it's one of the most heavily classified space missions that exists. We have no idea what its mission is.
But the level of secrecy surrounding the X-37B leads many to believe that its mission may be rooted in the origins of a secret space force.
The idea of a space force may be a far In the late 1950s, the Department of Defense was designing what they called Project Horizon, which was a military outpost that they were going to put on the moon.
In 1959, Project Horizon sets out to develop a 12-person outpost on the moon. Its purpose, to serve as a base to explore further into outer space. Officially, Project Horizon never materializes.
They wanted to do it 6 decades ago. Unfortunately, it just wasn't feasible. Today, may be a different story.
For years, many believed that the United States government is operating a secret space force with capabilities beyond the Earth's orbit. Until recently, it has been difficult to prove. But when retired Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer claims there is a shadow government functioning in outer space, it becomes difficult to ignore.
Paul Hellyer was the defense minister for Canada for many years. In 2005, he came out with a statement about UFOs because he had seen one, so he was convinced they were real.
He has gone on the record as saying not only are UFOs extraterrestrial, but there have been crashes, some vehicles have been recovered, and the US government does have a secret space force that he's actually concerned might one day end up taking hostile action against extraterrestrials.
Hellyer claims his concern for the security of planet Earth is the reason he has exposed the existence of a secret space force.
No military planner is going to want to leave any part of the battlefield undefended. So it stands to reason that as space is going to be an important part of any future war, you have to dominate space. So you need a space force, and that's probably going to be largely secret.
If you need to defend your planet, put a base here, put a base there, put a base here, and put a base there. It's simple logistics to warfare. Make sure you're protected from the outside. That way your enemy can't get in.
If a space force does exist, how far into the universe does it reach? Who controls it? And is it prepared to defend our world? Fighter pilots are responsible for the safety of our skies. It's a dangerous job that takes lightning-fast reflexes and nerves of steel. They are some of the most highly trained professionals in the world. But there is one threat they have not trained for.
It's one thing to, be in a dogfight with an enemy aircraft, but a UFO that, for all you know, has technology way ahead of your own. You go up there as a pilot, and what's going through your mind is, I may not come back down again.
One incident in the late 1940s, near America's largest gold reserve, strikes fear in the hearts of American pilots and incites a media firestorm. Unsealed case file, the Mantell incident. January 7th, 1948, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Captain Thomas F. Mantell is a decorated World War II pilot with over 2,000 hours of flight time. While patrolling the skies, he's told that a westbound circular object about 250 feet across has entered the Kentucky airspace.
In January of 1948, Thomas Mantell was piloting a P-51 Mustang, along with 2 other P-51s,
3 witnesses in the control tower of Goldman Field at Fort Knox make visual contact. The P-51 Mustangs of the Kentucky Air National Guard turn toward the object and accelerate. Mantell allegedly reports over his radio that the object looks metallic and is of tremendous size.
He got to about 20,000 feet when his P-51 then began to spiral out of control and later crashing, killing 25-year-old Thomas Mantell.
Rumor spreads that Mantell has been shot down by a UFO. It's the first incident in U.S. history where a fighter pilot allegedly dies engaging a UFO. For the first time, the Air Force and the public realize that UFOs are more than just mysterious. They can also be deadly.
The question is, how did he crash?
It didn't crash in the ground like a normal explosion, like if they'd taken the thing and dropped it out of the sky, boom. And the time on his watch had stopped at the time of impact.
The other idea is the UFO had an effect on his plane.
Some experts also believe Mantell may have been chasing a top-secret weather balloon called Skyhook. Multiple Skyhook balloons were launched 250 miles northeast that same day, but none of the explanations stick. And the military begins to make UFO identification a top priority.
It's going to definitely start spreading throughout the military and create some kind of hysteria or fear, because if your commanding officer says, get this enemy, and this enemy is better than you, there's a huge threat to that, and that's a huge problem.
Years later, an incident in Brazil confirms the one fact that has dogged the world's military for 40 years. Chasing UFOs is one thing. Catching them is an entirely different matter. Unsealed case file, the Sao Paulo UFO incident. Sao Paulo, Brazil, May 19th, 1986. 20 UFOs are tracked on radar and seen by eyewitnesses on the ground. 2 F-5Es and 3 Mirage fighter jets are scrambled from and Annapolis Air Force Base.
We had ground radar tracking 20 objects. We had multiple airplanes seeing this thing over the 4 hours.
Some of these pilots then acquired the UFOs visually as well as on their radars. This went on, involved at least 6 military aircraft, maybe more.
In a press conference, Brazilian General Otávio Lima states, at one point, the chase was inverted, and an F-5E fighter was surrounded by 13 colored lights and chased with 7 on one side and 6 on the other.
Afterwards, this was clearly taken seriously within the Brazilian government at high level. Senior Air Force officers were involved. I believe the Minister of Aeronautics was involved at one stage.
The Sao Paulo incident is discussed openly by high-ranking government officials in Brazil.
But then in the end, it was suggested that perhaps this was just space debris. Could it have been space debris? Now, of course, it could have been space debris if space debris likes to sit in one place and hover, but probably not.
A short message from the U.S. Defense Attaché in Rio to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency reads, quote, 3 visual sightings and positive radar contact from 3 different types of radar systems leads one to believe that something arrived over Brazil. Top secret government evidence, compelling eyewitnesses, and radar testimony suggest that advanced, unknown technology is threatening our airspace, and we may be powerless to stop it. Many pilots have engaged a UFO, only to have that unknown craft outmaneuver their jets, and worse, disable their instruments and weapons. But what happens when a shoot-down order is given and the pilot fires his missiles? Unsealed case file, the Peru incident. La Jolla, Peru, April 11th, 1980.
In April of 1980, an object was detected on radar in Peru. This is about 7:30 in the evening.
This is the case of Oscar Santamaria, and he was an Air Force commander who was scrambled in response to an uncorrelated target that was being tracked on military radar.
Almost 2,000 personnel are on shift at Mariano Melgar Air Force Base when what looks like a weather balloon is spotted near a high-security area.
A UFO had apparently penetrated and was operating within restricted military airspace, and he was ordered to open fire.
Pilot Oscar Santamaria Huertas is scrambled in his Su-22 Russian-made fighter jet, equipped with 30mm cannon. Readied with a shoot-down order, he flies directly toward the unknown target. But what happens next is widely considered to be the only reported direct hit on a UFO in military history.
So he rolls up on this thing and fires off his cannons into this balloon.
He said that unlike any conventional object, he said it was almost as if the rounds from his cannon were absorbed by this craft, whatever it was.
It doesn't blow up, nothing happens, it seems to ignore the bullets, and then just ascends into the air at a high rate of speed. Gone.
It's a scenario that is every fighter pilot's nightmare. His weapons are useless. Still under a shoot-down order, Santamaria spends the next 20 minutes playing cat and mouse with the UFO, trying to take another shot. When he gets close enough to make solid visual contact, what he sees astounds him.
I've heard it from him firsthand. I have absolutely no doubt that this happened exactly as he described.
Santamaria claims the UFO is shaped like a light bulb, cut off at the bottom, with a cream-colored dome. It has no visible means of propulsion, no windows, no wings. This now declassified official account of the incident is sent to the DIA. It states that the pilot, quote, intercepted the vehicle and fired upon it without causing any apparent damage. Believing the UFO is advanced technology from an extraterrestrial civilization, Santamaria fears for his life and rapidly descends back to base. Fortunately, the UFO does not follow.
It's a combat situation, and any pilot in combat will be under extreme stress. And clearly, if you add to that the factor that you're dealing with an unknown, it takes it to a completely different level.
What exactly did Santamaria see in the skies above Peru? Did he fire upon a UFO? Did he actually make a direct hit? Or did he simply succumb to the intense pressure of intercepting an unknown threat?
So there's the extreme stress of combat in an unknown situation and the very realistic prospect of death. So you get this kind of conflict that on the one hand they're involved in this maybe highly classified effort to engage with UFOs, and then after it's all over it's like, hey, this didn't happen. So I think pilots are being put under extreme stress at both ends of the spectrum. During the encounter, it's the combat stress, and afterwards it's that stress of secrecy and threats.
Caught between defending our skies from unidentified threats and the possibility of Air Force reprisals, the testimony of pilots who have been ordered to shoot down an unknown craft is critical to the study of UFOs. But can their efforts be mistaken as an act of war? Unsealed case file, the Cometa Report.
This report was entitled UFOs, What Should We Prepare For?
In 1999, the Cometa Report was published in France, which really outlined what the evidence was that supported that the UFO phenomena was real, and it was quite possibly a threat to the world as a whole.
It came to the twin conclusions, in effect, that UFOs at some level were a real, solid, tangible thing, and they were seriously prepared to consider the possibility that these things were indeed extraterrestrial spacecraft. Whatever you believe about UFOs, if you've got something flying in such controlled airspace, well, that's something that should be taken seriously, whether you're a believer or a skeptic.
The 13-member panel, made up of some of the brightest government, military, and scientific minds in France, hand down a stunning recommendation.
It outlined the fact that we needed to try and figure out a defense, a way to ward off and fend off any enemies that may be encroaching into our airspace and trying to invade our planet.
Are they visiting our planet? Thousands of witnesses, contactees would tell you yes.
We protect a lot here on the planet Earth, but the minute an alien civilization lands on Earth, that changes in a second.
The Cometa report questions the Earth's ability to defend against an unknown enemy attack.
If an alien spacecraft visits Earth and it's made out of nuts and bolts, pending no science fiction-like shield around it, I'm guessing we could probably find a way to shoot it out of the sky. But the big debate for me is why. You know, you're either going to successfully shoot down one craft of an alien race and potentially upset a much bigger force that has bigger guns than us. And I don't think that that's something that our pilots would do. I think we need to start crossing our fingers that they don't have any bad intentions. Because quite frankly, I don't think we're going to have the ability to get rid of them.
When the day comes, do we need to rethink how we approach unknown visitors in our skies? Despite constant denials, governments around the world do study UFOs.
I joined the British government's Ministry of Defence in 1985 and I left in 2006. My job was to research and investigate UFOs. I had mixed feelings when I joined the UFO project. On the one hand, I was fairly skeptical about this. When I looked at some of the extraordinary radar visual cases, I soon began to realize that my initial skepticism had been misplaced.
The United States government, among others, has formed many UFO investigative units dating back to the 1940s. After an unprecedented wave of UFO sightings in 1947, which includes the infamous Roswell incident, the U.S. created investigative bodies, Project Sign, Project Grudge, and ran Project Blue Book until it was canceled in 1969.
In July of 1947, headlines were printed that showed that a flying saucer, alien in nature, complete with bodies and all, crashed on a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico.
The United States Air Force became convinced the nation was being invaded by an unknown advanced technology. And in the fall of 1948, one of the military's own had an encounter that was too convincing to ignore. Unsealed case file, the Gorman dogfight. Fargo, North Dakota, October 1st, 1948. Veteran World War II pilot, Lieutenant George Gorman, is flying his Air National Guard P-51 Mustang over Fargo on a clear night.
He encounters an object. It's 6 to 8 inches in diameter, he describes it. It's well lit, it's a lit ball of light, and it's flying around the town just like he is.
Several other personnel at the base also witnessed the ball of light and describe it as bright, with tight edges. Gorman obtains permission to investigate the unidentified object.
He decides to engage him, and it starts playing with him. He has a few head-on passes with it. He tries to chase it around. It does things that he can't keep up with, and then eventually just takes off and he is gone.
He estimated that this object was flying at least 500 miles per hour, which was incredibly fast for the time. They were doing what they could describe as dogfight-type maneuvers in the sky, chasing each other.
Within hours of the incident, officers arrive from Project Sign, the U.S. government's official UFO investigative body at the time. During his interview, Gorman describes the ball of light as bright, with clear edges, not completely round, but slightly flat. Then he stuns investigators by stating that the unidentified object's movements were so specific and responsive that there was, quote, thought behind the UFO's maneuvers.
His report was considered very highly credible. He's a credible officer. So what was this thing? Nobody really knew. What he knew was he couldn't keep up with it, and it did things that he had never encountered before.
After a full investigation and national media coverage, Project Sign concludes that Gorman chased a weather balloon.
The incident with Gorman was not a lone case. There are quite a few examples in our UFO history that show that pilots do have encounters with UFOs.
After investigation, most cases did turn out to have conventional explanations, and I was able to explain them in terms of people misidentifying aircraft lights, weather balloons, satellites, meteors, airships, all manner of objects and phenomena. Perhaps in as many as 80% of cases, I was able to find a clear explanation.
The question is, what exactly did Gorman encounter in the skies above North Dakota? Despite Project Sign's official 1948 findings, experts in the UFO community consider the Gorman dogfight to be unresolved.
Many experts now look at the documents and say, well, they really weren't doing their job as true investigators. They were collecting these reports, analyzing them, and pretty much dismissing them one at a time. Weather balloon here, swamp gas there, the planet Venus over here. And they were just completely dismissing anything that came in.
Coming up, we uncover one of the most heavily investigated and confounding mass UFO sightings in European history. Many times, official government UFO investigations are stamped top secret. And history shows that they can also be influenced by political agendas and controversial analyses. But things that have compelling evidence, credible witnesses, and corroborated data. Nick Pope's work for Britain's UFO department gave him inside knowledge of the rarest type of UFO encounter.
In 5% of cases, or thereabouts, they were categorized as genuine unknowns. Now, of course, unknown does not necessarily mean, as the pop culture understanding is, extra. But not did we rule out that possibility. Unknown is unknown. Nothing more, nothing less.
Unsealed case file, the Belgium Wave. Eupen, Belgium, November 29th, 1989. A host of triangular UFOs appear in the night sky.
There were black triangular UFOs over Belgium. People were seeing them everywhere.
Many of them describe the black triangle craft that are reported today, where you have a black triangle craft, multiple lights on the bottom.
30 different sets of witnesses and 3 separate groups of police officers allegedly see black triangular UFOs in the skies above Belgium. Officials question the witnesses for any information that would lead to a rational explanation. But over the next few months, the initial sighting becomes a wave, with over 1,000 sightings reported from November of 1989 through the spring of 1990.
The Belgian Air Force response to that was to actually scramble jets and chase these things.
We always had specialists who could look at things in detail. The other big part of UFO investigations is radar.
They had F-16s, high-technology jet. They chased these things. They gave chase. They had visual contact. They had radar contact confirmation. And this went on for some time.
The evidence is overwhelming. Something is appearing in the skies. The Belgian government is forced to investigate. But how?
I would always make sure that in our investigations we included the experts, be they civilians or military, who could tell us, firstly, was anything tracked on radar? And secondly, if something was, what can you tell us about it? What I would then try to do is correlate that with something that I knew about or could find out about in terms of aerial activity, astronomical phenomena, etc. So, for example, I would look at flight paths. I would look at military exercises.
On March 30th, 1990, more than 4 months after the initial sightings, a NATO base near Glon, southeast of Brussels, registers an unknown object on radar. 2 F-16s are scrambled to intercept and identify an aerial unknown. One of the jets is able to achieve a radar lock for a few seconds and reports that the object is diamond-shaped.
Radar is not an exact science. Some returns are better than others. So again, that would be a big part, an important part of all government UFO investigations, not just in the British government's UFO project, but in Project Blue Book all around the world.
Many skeptics ask, if the Belgium triangles were so widespread, where is the photographic proof? Many eyewitnesses took photographs, but images are blurred and obscured, prompting one expert to consider the triangles were employing a sophisticated form of infrared jamming. But perhaps this single image of a black triangle captured from video footage taken during the Belgium wave was enough to justify the government's unprecedented investigation.
The Belgian government was actually very responsible. They treated these things as if they were real. They asked the public and ufologists to help them in an investigation of what these things were.
The Belgium UFO wave is an important and rare example of civilians, scientific experts, government officials, and independent UFO investigators collaborating and analyzing evidence.
But also, I guess, showed a little bit of faith that they knew what they were doing, that they were going to bring the truth to the forefront and try to unravel this UFO mystery.
Despite thousands of sightings, radar records, video and photographic evidence, nearly 30 years later, the mystery is still unexplained.
When you see black triangles or you hear about a wave, you can't help but think, is this potentially a testing ground?
Were they U.S.? Were they foreign technology that could represent a national threat to them? Or were they something from elsewhere?
Coming up, 60 years later, a sighting in Chicago, Illinois, has aviation investigators still telling eyewitnesses that seeing is not believing. In the past 7 decades, governments around the world have investigated thousands of UFO sightings and encounters, oftentimes under an umbrella of secrecy. But despite officially denying the existence of UFOs, to this day, many in the public are not convinced.
Each year, when I was working on the UFO project, I probably received 200 or 300 sighting reports, and each of these had to be properly investigated.
Unsealed case file, the O'Hare Airport Flying Disc, Chicago, Illinois, November 7th, 2006. Something unusual appears over one of the nation's busiest airports.
November of 2006, 4:15 in the afternoon, an object appears over at O'Hare Airport. Aircraft operations are shut down for a while for this object. This thing's sitting over the airport. People are seeing it, people are videoing it, and this thing just sits there.
But what is it? Many eyewitnesses that day described the object as a rotating gray disc, shaped like a frisbee.
It's a round, for want of a better term, flying saucer type spacecraft or craft, and people are looking at it, and then all of a sudden the thing just goes up vertically and punches a hole through the clouds.
The incident is witnessed by ground crew, pilots, passengers, and airline personnel.
It did shut down air operations for a while, but other than that, we didn't have time to scramble jets on it. We didn't really react to it well. We were in shock.
But many are reluctant to go on record and report what they saw.
You have to almost befriend them, or certainly empathize with them, be receptive, put them at ease if they're concerned that we wouldn't take them seriously, concerned that we might think they were wasting their time.
UFO, that's what I think it was. Yeah.
I mean, this happened, it's undeniable, and the Chicago Tribune, to their credit, I believe, put this on the front page, so the mainstream media knew that there was a story here.
The O'Hare UFO receives wide U.S. network media coverage, but the Federal Aviation Administration, the government agency that oversees national safety in our skies, refuses to investigate.
I think because of the ridicule factor, both the airline and indeed the Federal Aviation Administration kind of locked down this whole thing and said, oh, it didn't happen.
Dozens of people saw it. You know, you can't say that this thing didn't happen. It happened.
Authorities conclude that due to the low cloud ceiling that day, conditions were perfect for an atmospheric anomaly.
A skeptical explanation about a weather phenomenon was put forward,
Whatever was witnessed hovering above O'Hare is still, to this day, unexplained.
If you've got something flying in such controlled airspace, well, that's something that should be taken seriously, whether you're a believer or a skeptic.
From studying UFOs for years in the UK, Nick Pope knows that investigations are often abandoned due to lack of data.
In maybe 15% of cases, there was insufficient information, too little data to really come to a definitive conclusion.
Is this the reason the FAA will not investigate UFO sightings?
Why wouldn't they care if a UFO's there? Doesn't mean that it's alien, but it means that it's a threat. So it really kind of begs the question, are they covering up their interest?
Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, many governments claim that they do not investigate UFOs. But those who have witnessed unexplained phenomena in the sky, and many in the media, choose to believe otherwise. In 2011, the Huffington Post asked the Pentagon about a specific passage in the U.S. Personnel Manual. Air Force Manual 10-206 included on how United States Air Force pilots were to report UFO sightings.
All United States Air Force pilots were instructed and ordered to report any UFO, any unidentified flying object. This was spelled out in black and white for years.
Just a few days after the inquiry, the passage was deleted.
Within 24 hours of this major media outlet inquiring to the Pentagon about this manual, it was completely rewritten, it was changed, an entire chapter on UFOs was completely gone.
There are a couple of reasons why the military are very tight-lipped about UFOs. Firstly, the military are inherently a secretive organization. The default position is always say nothing unless you absolutely have to.
They were going to put the spotlight and show, beyond a reasonable doubt, unidentified flying objects was still on the books to be reported as Air Force pilots see them.
The second point is that as a hierarchical organization, it's actually very easy to clamp down on this, because if a senior officer says, don't talk about UFOs, that's an order, and all sorts of adverse consequences will befall anyone who disobeys that. That's why over the years the military has been very able to keep a lot of this secret.
Pentagon officials claim it was a coincidence that the passage was deleted at the time of the inquiry.
Why is there this big charade that they're not interested in anything related to UFOs? And in black and white, under the Freedom of Information Act, you can completely prove the opposite.
UFO phenomena.
This is not an area I can discuss in any great detail, of course, because I'm still bound by the British that through intelligence means those of us in government have a pretty good idea of the sorts of things that are out there.
The question is, what exactly is out there? There is no end to the discussion of UFOs, but no subject is as controversial or riveting as alien abductions. And alien abduction is the only type of encounter in which eyewitness testimony can reveal details about the inside of unidentified flying objects. Details that can help us understand how aliens live and what they want. Unsealed case file, the Allagash abductions. Allagash Waterway, Maine, August 20th, 1976.
The Allagash abduction is an absolutely fascinating case. This involved 4 men out fishing, 2 brothers and 2 friends. They had had little luck with their catch, so they decided to go out onto the lake in a canoe.
The 4 artist friends, including Chuck Rack, make a fire on shore to serve as a beacon for their nighttime fishing. What they don't know is that instead of catching something below, they are about to be caught by something above, something that will ultimately drive their friendships apart.
As they were out on the lake, they saw in the sky a bright light, and it got closer and closer. It descended until they saw this huge UFO.
The men later estimate the UFO to be 80 feet across.
Now, one of them decided to try and signal at it with a flashlight, and the UFO then came closer, and by this time the men were panicking. They decided to try and return to the shore. They were canoeing furiously, but a bright light shone down, and at that point there was a disconnect.
Suddenly, the men find themselves back on shore, but something is not right.
They had no real memory of what happened, but they next thing found themselves back on the shore, and intriguingly, the fire had burnt down completely. Well, this was not possible. It had been blazing, so the implication was clear. There was lost or missing time. Something had happened to these four men. Maybe it had been an hour, maybe longer, and yet they had no conscious memory of it.
Missing time is a classic symptom of alien abduction.
A lot of times when they recollect an experience like an alien abduction or a UFO sighting, they realize that there's a big chunk of time that they just simply can't account for, and that's what you call missing time.
Afterwards, they began to have flashbacks, dreams, nightmares. They went for regression hypnosis, and what emerged was an account that they were taken on board this ship.
Hypnosis is still heavily debated among UFO researchers and scientists as a tool to investigate close encounters and buried memories of traumatic experiences.
Hypnosis is the process of putting somebody into a very relaxed state. And what that means is they're not only very subjective to maybe memories being implanted in them, but it also kind of brings their walls down. If they have memories that they have forgotten.
During the Allagash hypnosis sessions, the men begin to recall an intense and vivid encounter with several aliens who allegedly took them aboard a UFO.
They saw strange entities, humanoid but clearly not human, and that, again, some medical procedure, which is often so central to these alien abduction experiences, was carried out.
But skeptics point out that there are many key similarities to alien abduction that may be the result of autosuggestion.
People literally report that they are floated into the craft somehow, often through the solid surfaces, through walls, through ceilings, through the hull of the ships themselves. Often, after that, they find themselves in an enclosed space of some sort. Often this is reported as quite sterile and white in color.
Skeptics hold up these common descriptions as reasons to doubt UFO abduction testimony. But if many of the descriptions are all similar, could it also be the truth?
There are frequent reports of a table or a raised platform in the center of what's often described as a fairly round but otherwise featureless.
When you listen to stories of abductions and the settings that they will recollect, some of them and most of them will actually remember being in some type of medical room, medical examination room with equipment around and their abductors above them. But you have to assume that that's not the only part of the ship.
Coming up, we investigate a famous abductee couple who are shown much more than just the medical room inside a UFO. Many abductees reports of being taken by aliens to medical rooms inside UFOs. Skeptics and believers all have the same question. Why? Unsealed case file. The Betty and Barney Hill abduction. September 19th, 1961. Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
This was a case of a couple returning home late at night, driving down the archetypal lonely country road near Exeter, New Hampshire.
Betty and Barney Hill were driving down the highway when they witnessed a UFO.
The couple initially describes the craft as multicolored lights flashing across the moon. The UFO rapidly descends, and Barney stops their car in the middle of the highway. A huge, silent, disc-shaped craft hovers in front of them. Using binoculars, Barney claims to see 11 humanoid figures staring out of the row of windows.
And as the craft then hovered over their car, cast a big light down on them.
Fearing for their lives, the couple jumps back in their car, but are pursued by the UFO. The next thing they know, they wake up 35 miles farther down the road.
This was a route and a journey that they were familiar with. So what happened?
Despite the shared incident, Betty and Barney Hill try to return to normal.
And under regression hypnosis, out came an account that it wasn't just, but this thing actually landed, and they were forcibly taken onto the craft.
Under hypnosis, the Hills recount harrowing stories.
The medical examinations, the abductors looming over them, taking bodily fluid and samples. They both recollected this, and you got to ask, well, what really happened to Betty and Barney Hill?
Barney Hill claims the aliens were almost human, and that they took him to a small examination room and placed him on a rectangular table.
Firstly, it does appear that a lot of this is quite functional. It's minimalistic, it's sterile. If people report a medical procedure or physical examination, the parallels with our own operating theaters are quite interesting.
But the similarities don't end there.
There are also motifs, I believe, that one can recognize from science fiction. And of course, the relationship between sci-fi and ufology is complex. Skeptics say abductees borrow even though it's different in some respect from our own. So there's a sort of familiarity here.
Which may explain why experiencers and abductees who are in different parts of the world that experience different abductors with different physical features, why the ships themselves are different as well.
With so many common similarities across many abductee reports, the question remains, is alien abduction testimony merely a fabrication? Or is it an attempt to make sense of something beyond human comprehension? Coming up, we reveal the vast interior of a UFO mothership from one of the most well-known alien abductions of all time. Many abductees who have allegedly witnessed the inside of a UFO report surroundings of a strangely familiar, yet advanced technology. But one man's now famous encounter describes something much more. A mothership. Unsealed case file. The Travis Walton abduction. November 5th, 1975. Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, Arizona. Travis Walton is employed on a logging crew in Arizona. After his shift ends, the crew drive back to camp. When a bright light appears just off the road, Travis decides to get a closer look.
Now, Travis Walton was a bit of an extrovert, a bit of a daredevil, and while all his friends and work colleagues were screaming at him to get back in the truck, Travis Walton actually walked this UFO, almost like he was challenging it, like quite aggressively.
But suddenly, Walton is engulfed by a beam of light coming from the UFO, and he disappears from view.
At this point, he was struck by a beam, and it literally took him off his feet, threw him through the air, and his colleagues thought that he had been killed.
Walton's co-workers drive away in a panic and later report his disappearance to the local sheriff. But 5 days after the incident, Walton's brother-in-law receives a call.
Travis Walton himself turned up some days later, disorientated, disheveled, miles away, with little recollection of what had happened to him. And it was only later, under regression hypnosis, that a fuller story emerged.
Travis tells a terrifying story of being subjected to invasive medical examinations and extended confinement.
Over the years, Travis Walton has agreed to sit a number of polygraph tests. Now again, if somebody was lying or had something to hide, I suspect he would have avoided putting himself in that position.
If alien abduction is truly happening, what do the abductors want?
If an intelligent civilization comes here and sees an incredibly inferior race, and their question is, how did the human race get there? How did this life form that has made these big buildings and they drive around in these cars, how did they come to be? Well, what are they going to do? We could probably safely assume they're going to do the exact same thing we would, and experiment.
While Walton's claims of a medical exam are a common thread among abductees, it is his description of the inside of the ship that defies explanation.
He talks about multiple rooms, and he seems to have had some freedom at some point to move around within the interior. He saw, for example, one space which he almost likened to a planetarium.
Walton describes a domed room with what seems to be a control chair in the center.
He sat in this thing. There seemed to be some sort of controls. He played around with them, and it was almost like like you see in a planetarium where stars appear on the ceiling. Now, he figured it probably wasn't a good idea that he continue to play with these controls, but it's one of the rare instances we have in an abduction account of somebody actually getting to try out the technology for themselves.
Walton is then escorted to another room in the spaceship that he claims is as large as an airplane hangar.
He reports this as being a cavernous area where within the ship there were all these smaller craft, rather like the one that he was taken into.
Walton witnesses multiple disc-shaped craft parked in the room that are each up to 60 feet in diameter.
The intriguing parallel here is, I guess, the idea of an aircraft carrier. I mean, people talk in the UFO field with alien abductions about scout ships and motherships. It's clear from Travis Walton that he was taken from a scout ship onto a mothership.
Are UFOs encountered on Earth merely the pathfinders for a colossal mothership?
Again, if one considers Travis Walton's account of all these other spaceships just existing within one space in the larger ship, it gives you some sense of perspective here. It tells you that the mothership must be huge. And I mean, some alien abduction accounts talk about spaceships the size of strip malls and football fields. Clearly, that's what Travis Walton was dealing with.
Alien abduction evidence that UFO motherships may be hiding in our orbit and sending scout ships to examine our planet and its various life forms, including the human species. But some experts maintain their actions and methods are not unlike our own.
Now, alien abduction tales are very hard to believe. It's a tough pill to swallow, don't get me wrong. But when you truly compare it and contrast it to the human race, to the science that we know, that we've learned from, that we've developed in just the last 150 years, when you look at it, we're on the same path. There's absolutely no difference between these crazy stories that some like to dismiss as just being fantasy versus our science that we've already done. So I think we're just pretty much on a crash course for the same path.
Reports, what's really critically missing is some absolutely definitive corroboration. Eyewitness testimony is important, and when it's corroborated independently, that's evidentially significant. But what we really need is information.
And I think it's only a matter of time that if abductees are truly experiencing these types of rides on an alien spacecraft. Some of them are more joyous than others, admittedly, but if they really are experiencing this, I think one day our digital technology will capture it.
The extraterrestrials, if that's what we're dealing with, would only have to slip up once. And an abductee would only have to get lucky once and sneak something off the craft, and it's game over. And I look forward to the day when someone will manage to smuggle some artifact off a spaceship.
And when that day comes, abductees may end up being the ones to prove the existence of extraterrestrials once and for all. Many experts believe aliens may have visited Earth before and will inevitably descend upon us in the future. But more unsettling is the possibility that aliens are already here and that they are using us for their own benefit. Join us as we investigate the growing possibility that aliens closely monitor planet Earth and that our civilization just may be their prized experiment. UFOs and close encounters have been reported around the world for decades in densely populated urban centers, along coastal areas, in rural farmland, and in barren deserts. But why are UFOs here?
There are several different theories about why extraterrestrials might be visiting the Earth. That this is the prelude to some sort of alien invasion, that they're after our resources, whatever it is, and that they are scouting us, studying us, and this is prelude to them coming here all guns blazing to either exterminate us or enslave us.
There's a lot of theories on why they're here. And I think when you truly want to answer that question, you have to understand what the human race wants from the stars. And that's the knowledge, it's the experience, it's the understanding of what's truly going on out there.
Other theories are that they are just scientists, that the reason for studying Earth is purely scientific. They're interested in our geology, our meteorology.
Science tells us that the Earth will eventually cease to exist. And to survive this future catastrophe, the human race must develop the ability to colonize another planet.
The human race cannot be here for infinity. So the same is true for other planets out there in the universe. Suns will die, which means livable planets that are perfect today will not necessarily be perfect tomorrow.
Here on Earth, one way to transform inhospitable environments is called terraforming.
Terraforming is the process by which one would take a hostile environment, an alien planet like Mars or Venus, and one would effect, through a number of different strategies, changes devised at making the planet more like Earth, in many ways indistinguishable from Earth.
So if an alien civilization wants to terraform Earth, I think it's safe to say that they may need another planet to live. That we might be close to being perfect for them because they evolved on a hotter planet or maybe a colder planet, so they need to turn the temperature down or turn the heater up, so to speak. But they could come and change and morph this planet into what they need.
If you can build a spaceship and come to Earth, actually causing a volcano to erupt or changing the path of a hurricane would probably be child's play.
Recently, one such incident had the UFO community and the public on high alert. Unsealed case file. The Popocatépetl UFO, May 30th, 2013, Central Mexico. Active volcano, Popocatépetl, is Mexico's second highest peak and only 40 miles southeast of Mexico City.
Mexican volcanologists obviously need to keep a very close idea on all the volcanoes, and particularly Popocatépetl has been the subject of some considerable concern. So there are remote cameras set up to monitor the volcano.
On May 30th, 2013, there was a UFO that was caught on camera that was seen streaking across the sky towards Mount Popo.
One day, scientists, when reviewing the film, saw an anomalous light, and when they played the film, it seemed to show this UFO actually, at one point, changing direction and flying directly into the crater of the volcano itself.
Why would a UFO fly into the smoking caldera of a volcano? And how could it sustain such high temperatures?
A lot of people theorize that these UFOs are helping civilization on Earth by stopping natural disasters. Mount Popo is an active volcano. It can blow at any time. And some think that these UFOs will have some type of physical effect on the mountain itself, on that volcano, to, in essence, calm it down to where it doesn't erupt, in essence, killing thousands of people.
One theory is that extraterrestrials monitor the Earth and occasionally use technology to keep us safe from a global catastrophe.
Some people have said that this is what happened with the UFO at Popocatépetl, that this was some sort of probe sent into the volcano to prevent it from erupting.
Many believe that the alien civilization that's visiting Earth is trying to help us, to preserve us, to stop any natural disaster that might wipe out a large corner of our civilization.
But many in the UFO community think otherwise.
I don't believe that the aliens are going to come here just to stop a volcano in the middle of Mexico to save lives. Death is a part of living. It's just a fact. So if these are physical creatures and physical beings, I don't believe they're going to come to a planet simply to play God. It just doesn't seem plausible to me.
Experts are divided on whether alien visitors are friend or foe. But ever since the first atomic bomb test on July 16, 1945, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, UFOs have been appearing in alarming numbers over top-secret nuclear weapons facilities.
It seems clear that there is a connection of some sort between the UFO phenomenon and the development of nuclear technology on Earth. It's interesting that the birth of the modern UFO phenomenon in 1947 came very soon after the detonation of the first atomic bombs, first as a test, and then, of course, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
There's a lot of speculation that our nuclear development, our nuclear arsenals, the technology that could allow the human race to completely wipe itself literally off the map, would be of great interest to another society.
It's also interesting that really the first burst of UFO activity took place in a geographical part of the United States where so much of the world's nuclear industry was actually based. Roswell was actually the home of the world's only atomic bomb-capable squadron in 1947.
But what may have begun in New Mexico spread to all corners of the United States. Unsealed case file, the Minot UFO. October 24th, 1968, Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota.
There was an intriguing UFO encounter at Minot Air Force Base in 1968, and this involved, by varying reports, one or even two UFOs in close proximity of the base. And one of the things that made this case so compelling was that the UFO was tracked on radar.
In the early 1960s, Minot became a major strategic air command base with nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles and manned bombers.
An incoming B-52 was on patrol. It was coming in for a landing, and it was radioed that there was an unidentified craft about 3 miles from their aircraft.
Now, there was a B-52 bomber returning to the base, and personnel at Minot were in communication with the B-52. They said, "We are tracking on our radar scope an uncorrelated target," and they asked the crew to look out for this. The crew themselves saw a UFO, and subsequently the perimeter alarm, both the outer and the inner perimeter alarm, were triggered.
These pictures are actual radar scope photographs taken of the unidentified Minot object.
Now, they couldn't figure out exactly what this thing was, but the B-52 confirmed by radar that there was a fast-moving object about 3 miles away. Then, all of a sudden, as the documentation says, the craft went from 3 miles to about 1 mile from the aircraft like that, at a very fast rate of speed, something that they said their technology at the time just couldn't do.
At one point, communications went offline again, so one has all the way through this encounter the corroboration. This UFO was seen visually. It was tracked on radar. It was seen by the military witnesses on board the B-52, and it somehow triggered the remote sensors that set off the alarms. In evidential terms, a case does not get much better than that.
The B-52 crew claims the UFO paced their aircraft for about 20 miles before quickly disappearing.
The B-52 crew was then radioed about a second UFO being seen on radar by the base that was either slightly above or on the ground just outside the military installation.
The bomber is ordered to investigate the second UFO, but they cannot identify the craft.
The B-52 was able to do a flyby and see a brightly lit object on or near the ground that they simply could not identify. After doing a pass, they later landed back at base, but they were never able to what the origin of those two craft were.
Again, one is faced with the inescapable conclusion that our nuclear capability, our nuclear facilities are at the center of all of this.
Many other reports suggest that some UFOs are immune to Air Force defenses, but still have never attacked. This leads some UFO experts to wonder if aliens might be performing reconnaissance of Earth, or perhaps policing us.
Does a civilization become interesting and perhaps a cause for concern when it develops, as we developed, not just nuclear technology, but with our rockets, the capability to ultimately take our nuclear technology out into the wider galaxy?
We don't know what part our solar system plays. It might not be that they care about the human race. It might be that they care about this one planet, the third rock from the sun, because it brings stability on a much grander scale.
If extraterrestrials are interested in one thing about planet Earth, it would be that thing which poses the biggest significant threat, both to ourselves and indeed to any other civilizations that might be out there.
Evidence that planet Earth is being visited by extraterrestrials. But exactly why they are here and what they may be after is still a mystery.
There's something about Earth that would be a breeding program, a genetic study of some sort. There is so much biodiversity on Earth, and life seems to find its way into almost every... There's almost everything and anything that you want, and it's right here for the taking.
Unsealed case file, the Corina Sables abduction. Aldergrove, British Columbia, July 17th, 1991. Corina Sables and a friend witness a huge boomerang-shaped UFO in the night sky above her home. Suddenly, she vanishes, only to reappear an hour later with no memory of the incident. And she cannot account for the missing time. Following her disappearance, she has a strange feeling that this was not the first time she had been taken.
That could be something that they could come to this planet to mine for themselves. Maybe that resource is in the human body.
Soon after, her daughter begins drawing an alien that she calls the Doctor, who she says occasionally enters her room while she sleeps. The drawing opens a flood of hidden abduction memories in Sables, including needles piercing her stomach and seeing rows of alien fetuses in liquid suspension.
as if these people are being harvested almost as a resource.
Comes to believe that she is part of an ongoing experiment to create alien-human hybrids.
The Karina Sables incident is really a classic example of what you would call a repeater abductee. Somebody who's had multiple experiences. These things are seldom one-offs.
Sables makes another startling revelation, recalling childhood stories that her mother told her. Stories of alien abduction.
They start in childhood, they continue throughout the lifetime, and they seem to involve different members of the same family.
The question is, what sort of interest and use to the abductors is genetic material from multi-generational bloodlines? Sables claims her womb has been used by Greys to produce alien fetuses. But before they can be born, she is abducted again, and they are removed from her body.
Human DNA and genetic material is being harvested as part of a program to create a hybrid race.
But why would the Greys want to crossbreed with humans?
It's been speculated that the Greys might be clones that are degrading through successive clonings. The idea one often hears is that the aliens are a dying race, that they're trying to reinvigorate themselves by bringing in fresh genetic material to enable them to breed again, to procreate, to survive.
Some believe that aliens may be among us, and they may be after more than just our physical resources.
There could be 1,000 or 1,000,000 or even an infinite possibilities of what they don't have, but the human race takes for granted.
So maybe millennia ago, these were biological intelligences who lost their biology, they lost their bodies. And it's now maybe they want back what they once had.
Could some extraterrestrials originate from vast cyborg civilizations? And if so, what is the one key thing these beings might be lacking?
The one thing that they might want is a soul.
If some alien civilizations are seeking something much deeper than just our DNA, what might happen if they succeed?
Imagine something which has existed as a clone for millennia suddenly getting hold of human emotions, anger, love, fear, hate, wonder. Would they be able to control these emotions? Would they be able to handle them?
Look at humans. You got some really good ones, and you got some really bad ones. The minute a machine can think for itself, and all of a sudden 1,000 years of human thought is achieved in 72 hours by a machine, when you look at that, you're flirting with disaster.
The universe is such an infinite place that light from the stars we see at night, stars in our own galaxy, takes hundreds of years to reach us. And there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. Within the universe, Earth is like a grain of sand in the Sahara. So, if extraterrestrials have visited here, how did they find us? Where did they come from? And how did they cross such an unfathomable distance?
One of the popular theories is a wormhole or a portal that an alien civilization could travel to. Instead of point A and point B having a straight line to connect them, that you in essence will morph space and time and bring those points together.
Unsealed case file, the Oswald abduction. October 15th, 1979, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Respected concert pianist Louis Oswald is driving at night with a friend down a coastal highway 30 miles north of Rio. Suddenly, several hundred yards offshore, she sees UFOs launch out of the water.
They saw a UFO and underwent what the UFO community would say is almost like a classic missing time alien abduction encounter.
Luli and her friend later described seeing a black UFO, darker than the sky, with a domed top that is more than 300 meters across. Two smaller UFOs chase their car. Luli and her friend panic, but the next instant find themselves driving safely down the road again. All is normal, except for one thing. It's 3 hours later. Investigators soon discover other UFO encounters have been reported on the same stretch of lonely highway. But Luli's nightmare does not fully begin until she undergoes hypnosis. She asks one of the beings where they come from, and he describes a tunnel connecting to a portal under Antarctica.
And this was one of the upshots of the Luli Oswald case, that actually there are, I suppose, what you would call portals, gateways, perhaps, to other locations, other dimensions, and that those portals are hidden out of our sight by virtue of being in our oceans. Some people believe that other dimensions are all around us, and that within them, laws of physics totally different to our own may apply.
Theories of wormholes and portals and bending space and time, that all sounds great, but there is a possibility that it's just a theory, that none of it is true.
But recently, NASA discovered that a portal may not be just the cornerstone of science fiction. NASA's Themis spacecraft is designed to detect electromagnetic fields that interact with the Earth, fields that create the aurora borealis. But instead, it found something remarkable.
Their Themis spacecraft has located portals in the Earth's magnetic field, which they call X-points.
Particles will actually spill out from one side of the sun, go through where the bridge of, or the barricade of the two magnetic fields join together, will go through that and actually have quite a bit of effect here on the planet Earth, where extreme light shows of the aurora borealis will light up our atmosphere.
They are, from an undeniable scientific mainstream point of view, a way in which from the sun's magnetic field to the Earth's magnetic field, there is this flow. Imagine a canoeist on a lake. Now, that canoeist will have to paddle. But now imagine that same canoeist on a fast-flowing river. You know, they actually don't have to do anything. They just go with the flow. That is maybe how extraterrestrials are using the natural phenomena that we find in the universe to travel.
Many experts believe NASA's Themis spacecraft may have discovered the genesis of how portals come to be. And it may be the key to extraterrestrial technology.
We're on the cusp of understanding these little hidden discoveries in the universe that maybe one day we'll understand. There's a portal between point A and point B, that instead of creating that straight line and traversing it over 100,000 years, that you can travel through a doorway and get there in a day and a half.
Close encounters and scientific investigation offer a possible glimpse into the secrets of extraterrestrial interstellar flights. And all roads lead to one important concept: anti-gravity propulsion.
It seems clear that science is beginning to look seriously at the idea of exotic energy sources, exotic propulsion systems, rotating disks, and anti-gravity. These are the first steps in taking humanity out of the cosmos.
The theory is that they could potentially unlock those secrets of the cosmos, figure out how to do 100,000 light years of travel in a very short amount of time, where, yeah, you and I can't understand that, but an alien race who had a 1,000,000-year head start on us, that's child's play.
Unsealed case file: the Janos incident. June 19, 1978, Gloucester, UK. John Mann and his family are driving down a rural highway at night when they spot a convex object in the sky. John pulls the car over and sees a silent, black, disc-shaped UFO. He drives away in fear, but it takes an unusually long time to arrive at their destination, time for which he has no explanation.
The Janos incident of 1978 gives us an incredibly rich narrative of another civilization. The story that emerged here from the family that encountered these extraterrestrials was that they were dealing with almost, I guess you'd use the phrase, galactic refugees.
Under regression hypnosis, the Mann family recounts an incredible encounter with an enormous alien civilization.
A cataclysmic event involving the destruction of one of their own moons had rained fire and destruction on their own world, and a huge ring-shaped spaceship with 10 million passengers had effectively taken the Janos people away to seek a new home.
The aliens allegedly tell the Mann family that they are parked in Earth's orbit, waiting for permission to land.
We get this incredible account of a civilization looking for a new home, right here.
The family allegedly encounters one particular alien who offers them a stunning proposition.
And that the leader had said, if you will deal with us, if you will give us permission to make our home here, as our world has been destroyed, is that we will give you, the human race, ships that would take us to the stars. The value of that to the human race would be incalculable.
John Mann claims that he has shown the alien civilization's journey from Earth back to planet Janus. But how did they get here? Many modern scientists believe that developing some form of anti-gravity propulsion system is the key to understanding how many UFOs behave.
Because there's a lot of speculation that any exotic energy source and propulsion system either uses or has as its byproduct a plasma.
Plasma is a supercharged state of gas created by electromagnetic forces. But just how a UFO may utilize it is a mystery. Many reports of UFOs describe a bright light, like a ball of plasma, that often turns into a metallic-looking UFO upon closer examination. Could plasma be the key to understanding how extraterrestrials are able to perform interstellar travel?
In the 90s, an anti-gravity device of some sort. He constructed these ceramic rings which he put into magnetic fields using superconductors, and rotating this claimed that as much as 2% of the weight just disappeared.
Just how important would a scientific breakthrough of that magnitude be to the future of humanity?
If a civilization has a 100,000 year or a 500,000 year or a million year head start, their technology, their intelligence, their science, their ability to really kind of traverse the stars is going to be so far beyond the capability of the human race, we wouldn't even be able to fathom it as a society right now.
Is the future of interstellar flight within our grasp? And if so, what does that say about our place in the galaxy?
The human race needs to go to the stars if we're to evolve and survive, and we can't do that without interstellar travel, viable interstellar, faster-than-light travel. If someone can give us that, if we can trade that, the value of that, we are talking nothing less than the survival of the human race itself. And those are high stakes.
It is inevitable that one day the human race will step foot on another planet and there will be some other intelligent civilization to greet us. The human race then becomes that extraterrestrial entity that is setting foot on an alien planet to us, but a home to someone else. It's inevitable when it'll happen.
The hunt for intelligent life in the universe has never been more urgent. Rapid advances in science and technology have given mankind unprecedented access to distant galaxies that could harbor life, and the galaxies of subatomic particles that make up the entirety of life itself. Now that we have the power to understand our place in the universe on a fundamental level, one question remains: are we alone? And if extraterrestrial life exists, where is it?
I believe they are there. The big question is whether or not that they have come here.
Scientists around the world are hunting the universe for signs of intelligent life. But where are they looking, and why?
If there's other life out there in the universe, which I'm sure there is, it's only a matter of time before we find them. Basically, this is going to happen one of two ways. Either they'll come to us and it will be beyond any dispute. There will be sort of landing on the White House lawn, spaceships in orbit over all major cities, whatever form it takes. Or, if it doesn't happen that way, we'll go out and find them.
When we look at the stars for life or intelligent life that is budded on another planet, we look, number one, for Earth-like planets. And what we've realized in the last couple of decades is that nearly every star in the sky probably has a string of planets very much like our solar system.
So you would look for a rocky inner planet, and this is the critical thing. It should be probably in the so-called Goldilocks zone, which is that part of a solar system where the temperature would be neither too hot nor too cold, and where water, this is the critical thing, would be able to exist in liquid form.
I believe that by the sheer numbers alone, the odds of another civilization being out there are pretty astronomical.
It's only a matter of time before we find kind of Earth 2, so to speak. And recent studies suggesting there might not be hundreds or thousands, but millions or even billions of worlds like our own out there, billions of Earths, suggests to me that the universe should be absolutely swarming with life.
It's one thing to look for simple organisms, but how can scientists search for advanced extraterrestrial civilizations? Many scientists are looking at the phenomenon known as a black hole, a vortex where a huge amount of matter has collapsed in on itself, creating such an extreme force of gravity that nothing can escape it, not even light.
Some of the people who say, where do we look, say the real smart civilizations will migrate to near the black hole. So if you look for the black hole, that's where you might find aliens. Not in it, but close enough to it to mine somehow the energy.
Using a black hole as fuel is far beyond our technological capability. But there is another more prevalent type of universal energy, much closer to home. Unsealed case file. The Sun. March 12, 2012. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory captures stunning pictures of a giant orb that appears to be detaching from the surface of the Sun and shooting out into space.
A lot speculate this is an alien spaceship, that this is something that's using our sun to power their ship like a gas station. Stop, fill up, and away they go.
NASA claims the object is a little understood phenomenon called a prominence, and how they arise on the surface of the Sun makes them appear otherworldly.
One of the biggest problems I have with this discovery is the sheer size of what this phenomena is. When you compare the size of Earth to the Sun, you're talking about a very small dot, maybe even a marble compared to this gigantic Sun, the star that gives us life here on Earth. When you look at this video and you see the Sun, this object is a considerable size. This would have to be the size of multiple Earths all put together.
Even NASA say they don't really understand what these filaments would be. So I think what this tells us is whatever we think this thing is, alien spaceship or natural phenomenon, it tells us that the universe has some big surprises in store for us, and that everything we think we know, we may have to rethink and learn a whole new physics.
Coming up, we visit one of Earth's closest planetary neighbors and investigate why many consider it to be alien territory. The hunt for alien life in the universe has taken huge leaps forward, with new advances in physics, telescopes, and communications. But perhaps the most important breakthrough has come from developments in the aerospace industry.
I believe it's inevitable that the human race will conquer long-term spaceflight, but you're going to have to figure out what you're willing to sacrifice. Are we talking about a 10-year flight? Are we talking about a 10-week flight? Or are we talking about a 10,000-year flight to get to another solar system in general? So we have to figure out what we're willing to do to achieve that long-term spaceflight.
As mankind expands its presence in the solar system, Mars is a natural stepping stone, and NASA predicts we will set foot on the red planet sometime in the 2030s.
Here we are, truly on the cusp of manned Mars missions. In the next 2 to 3 decades, they believe that we will put a human on the surface of Mars, but they're not coming back. It's a sacrifice that the astronauts who will leave the planet Earth for good will land on Mars and live the remaining days of their lives on another planet.
We already have evidence that it's supported life in the past, and exploring Mars could answer a fundamental question. Is there extraterrestrial life beyond our solar system?
There's life out there, and, you know, whether it's picking up a signal on a radio telescope, whether it's going out there and finding them for ourselves, but we're going to get there. Ours is going to be the generation that makes this discovery, and my goodness, it's going to be the biggest and most profound discovery that the human race has ever made.
Unsealed case file, the Mars Anomalies. July 26, 1976. The Viking 1 spacecraft is 1,000 miles above Mars and scanning the surface for a place to send the Viking 2 lander down to the red planet. On its 35th orbit, Viking 1 captures a photograph taken from Mars' northern desert region called Cydonia. This picture of a mile-long desert mesa stuns the world with its uncanny similarity to a human face.
Hardly a week goes by, so it seems, without some photo from the surface of Mars cropping up that someone says shows some anomaly.
This leads many in ufology to conclude that this and countless more pictures from the surface of Mars are evidence of an alien civilization.
Is this an artifact? Is this a bone? Is this life? I mean, people talk about the face on Mars, but there have also been lizards, bones, fossils, all sorts.
Looking at photos that have come back from Mars, people have seen pyramids, faces on Mars, creatures walking around, fossilized remnants of ground squirrels, a skull.
We are now collecting an unprecedented amount of data from satellites and probes on Mars.
The theory was that Mars used to have water, which we now know is true. Perhaps there was a civilization there, but it was dying. And it was building these canals to try and irrigate their crops, to try and desperately cling to life.
But what does the red planet have to offer mankind now? Scientists believe Mars may be our best option if humanity needs to start again.
Our first view was that we would probably set up some sort of colony under a dome in which we would have an atmosphere like our own. But now the thinking is, why build a dome and have ourselves so limited and so vulnerable, when actually the best way to go forward would be to change Mars so that we terraform it into something where we wouldn't walk around and breathe the atmosphere.
NASA has studied how Mars could be terraformed using our current technology and suggests that it's complicated but possible. The process would begin by releasing greenhouse gases into the Mars atmosphere. The effect would be to raise the planet's surface temperature to a livable level, melt polar ice caps to provide water, and plant trees to produce oxygen.
We know for a scientific fact that Earth will die. Everybody here on the planet Earth will cease to exist. And so we have to figure out how to get off this planet.
The search for extraterrestrial life extends from our own planetary neighborhood deep into the cosmos. But some scientists believe that to find alien life, we need to rethink our concept of time and look no farther than our own backyard. Unsealed case file, the Papua New Guinea wave. June 26th and 27th, 1959. Boyanai, Papua New Guinea. Reverend William Gill is a respected educator and ordained priest, teaching in Papua New Guinea. On the night of June 26th, he and 38 other witnesses see a light descend from the clouds and a large object that he later refers to as a mothership.
The mass sightings that took place in Papua New Guinea in 1959 were compelling and actually a little disturbing. The main witness was a missionary called Father Gill, and together with a number of locals, they saw UFOs over a period of several weeks, and there were probably 20, 30, 40, 50 sightings.
Reverend Gill describes the UFO as disc-shaped, with a wide base and landing gear.
On one of the occasions, Father Gill reported a craft where he said there was what appeared to be almost a viewing deck on top of this thing, where he saw strangely humanoid entities which almost appeared to be looking at us.
In a spontaneous gesture, Reverend Gill stretches his hand to wave, and he claims that the beings on the spaceship wave back.
He wasn't the only witness. There were about 5 other ones, including a teacher, that saw these humanoid beings on top of a UFO above them.
Copies of Reverend Gill's own report were distributed to members of Australia's parliament. But in the end, Air Force authorities dismissed the incident.
And you can almost understand an alien spaceship with aliens in. But if you see something with beings that are so similar to us that they're indistinguishable, it is almost the most disturbing thing of all. I mean, because you ask yourself, who are these people? What do they want? Why do they look so like us?
The sighting is so important that 13 years later, famous American UFO investigator Dr. Allen Hynek decides to re-examine the evidence.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek was a scientist who headed Project Blue Book. He started off as a pretty big skeptic, pretty much a debunker. He thought every UFO case that was out there was explainable. But as he saw more and more, and he talked to more witnesses, and he understood a little bit more about the phenomena, he was a skeptic debunker turned believer.
For him to say so many years after the event that this is important, and he flew out there and he interviewed some of the witnesses, this tells me that this was a case of almost unique interest and importance in the whole history of the UFO phenomenon.
Hynek is mostly interested in the eyewitness claims that the aliens looked human.
One possible reason why this disturbs people so much, and it's a motif that one sees in science fiction, is infiltration. I guess the classic sci-fi series is The Invaders, but the idea that we have aliens in human form, perhaps slowly bringing their people down, getting them into key positions of power.
Some speculate that the case in New Guinea is proof that the human race is being visited not necessarily by an alien race that comes from another solar system or another planet, but rather it's ourselves. It's the human race coming back in time to revisit its infant self, to look down at their civilization 1,000, 50,000, even 100,000 years prior to when they are.
Could the Papua New Guinea UFO incident be humans from the future?
I believe that if we are being visited and these UFOs are not our Earth-based technology, that it's probably an alien civilization that comes from the stars. But the fun thing about this is we simply don't know. Science is proven wrong all the time.
And how can you fight them if you don't know who they are? Your family, your friends, your neighbors, your scientific figures, your political leaders, your religious leaders. I mean, what if all these people are actually aliens? I mean, it sounds crazy. Any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars probably has the technology to disguise itself effectively. So maybe it's not a question of, you know, going out and looking for them. Maybe they are already here.
While some search for extraterrestrials in deep space, encounters reported with humanoid beings have many in the UFO community wrestling with a paradox. Are extraterrestrials human beings from the future?
It's definitely possible that if a biological life form started evolving on another planet with Earth-like conditions on an Earth-like planet in a solar system that is like ours, that the theory of evolution will probably prove true, that they will look very similar to us.
Recently, an expert in computational genomics decided to find out.
Dr. Alan Kwan at Washington University conducted an intriguing study where he speculated about the future of the human race. And he said, well, we often look back, but what if we look forward, maybe 100,000 years? What might human beings look like?
Both a man and a woman, their head was growing in size, so it's much larger than what we look like today.
I mean, it's obviously human, and yet it isn't.
Many UFO researchers have seen these physical characteristics before.
If you go forward not 100,000 years, but 1 million, is that image going to actually be the image of a grey alien that would be familiar to every sci-fi fan and ufologist on the face of the planet? And that leads us to a possibility. Are the greys actually not aliens at all, but us? Are the greys what we, human beings, evolve into?
Could our genetic makeup be universally connected? Are alien visitors in our skies actually our distant relatives?
People often talk about the search for aliens. Well, maybe we've already found them. Maybe they're already here. Maybe if they are us, we are the aliens.
In the years right after World War II, UFO sightings are still considered rare and unusual events. But the UFO phenomenon is about to descend onto the world stage. Many government experts consider the unusual aircraft are not aliens from another world, but Soviet spies or Nazis testing Allied defenses and gathering intelligence for an impending war.
In the mid to late 40s, we had these unknown craft that were appearing above the United States. There wasn't really necessarily an immediate fear that this was aliens attacking us, but we were just out of World War II. There was a lot of fear that this could be Nazi technology that survived the war, and they were doing some kind of second push.
Public attitudes about all of this were strange. We were in that odd post-war era. Everything was kind of in flux. The Nazis, the Japanese had been defeated, but this new enemy, our former ally, the Soviet Union, had emerged. The Second World War had transitioned into the Cold War. It was a time of great uncertainty, great confusion.
After Hiroshima, America's secret weapon is no longer a secret. But no one knows if the Soviet Union also has atomic weapons, or if escaped Nazis harbor the technology.
It was a period of unprecedented confusion, uncertainty, and nerves.
We knew that very well have created some base somewhere else with this technology and started to attack us.
Unsealed case file. The Kenneth Arnold sighting. June 24th, 1947. Mount Rainier, Washington.
In June 1947, just before the infamous Roswell incident, a light aircraft pilot called Kenneth Arnold had a sighting which would change the world. While he was flying over the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, he saw 9 strange objects flying in formation at a speed he estimated to be 1,200 miles an hour.
Arnold claims the objects are delta-shaped craft and vary their angle and speed in a manner impossible for 1947. He describes the saucers moving at a speed that would kill a normal pilot, and initially concludes the objects are either remote-controlled and man-made or not of this world.
What was not?
This was significantly ahead of any technology that was flying at the time. And these strange delta-shaped craft were like nothing he'd ever seen before. And of course, he was a pilot, so a very good witness.
His story has been really known in the field of ufology as that first case, that first unknown interaction between an actual pilot seeing craft outside of his window that lacked any explanation whatsoever.
When he was asked later how these things had moved, not only did he describe the speed, but he went on to talk about a sort of jerky movement. And he said it was like a stone would be, like a saucer would be if you skipped it over the water. Before 1947, the public really didn't have anything to call UFOs. There was really no label for all of this.
But a newspaper catches on to Arnold's saucer description, and the term flying saucer enters the modern lexicon.
It tapped into something. It captured the public imagination. The story was syndicated around the world, and suddenly flying saucer fever swept the world. A new term had been born, and this really was the beginning of the flying saucer age.
In 1947, at the dawn of modern-day ufology, where flying saucers were being seen all around the United States, the government created the United States Air Force. Now, the United States Air Force pretty much took the lead in trying to figure out what UFOs were.
Just 1 week after the Air Force officially separates from the Army, it creates Project Sign, which becomes the first organization in the world to try and understand the UFO problem from a scientific perspective.
And Project Sign investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with here?
There wasn't one or two sightings at this point. They were being reported throughout the United States at a very high rate. So they knew the phenomena was real. They had to figure out what it was.
The fledgling U.S. Air Force initially considers many UFO sightings might be foreign enemy technology.
When these craft were appearing above America, we had no idea if the Soviets decided, well, hey, you know what? Maybe Hitler had a point to rule the world, and even though he failed and we got him, let's turn our sights to America and let's control those guys.
But as UFO sightings increase, so does the government's fear of what UFOs might actually be.
Just as the United States grabbed a whole bunch of Nazi scientists in Operation Paperclip and started putting together secret programs of their own, well, maybe the Soviets got some too. So could some of these flying saucers be Soviet aircraft or even missiles?
In 1947, UFO researchers from the United States Air Force struggled to explain a wave of sightings across the country, until a series of sightings at an important U.S. Air Force base has the government on high alert. Unsealed case file, the Muroc Air Force Base incident. July 7th, 1947, Southern California.
Shortly after Kenneth Arnold's flying saucer sighting, shortly after the Roswell incident, came a series of strange sightings at Muroc Air Force Base, now known as Edwards Air Force Base in California.
At 10 a.m. on July 7th, a pilot observes an unknown spherical object flying east at about 10,000 feet. On July 8th, 4 military personnel observed 2 circular objects flying at approximately 300 miles per hour, spiral toward the horizon.
Some of the craft were described as simply light spheres or orbs in the sky, while others were the more common flying saucer UFOs.
Later that evening, a P-51 pilot twice attempts to intercept a flat silver disc of a, quote, light-reflecting nature
pilot of a jet aircraft who actually chased a UFO unsuccessfully for a while. The speeds and maneuvers were described as too great for him to even catch this thing. Even the commanding officer had a sighting.
UFO sightings have suddenly become an alarming trend within the military community.
It's one thing for a civilian or even a civilian pilot to see flying saucers and describe them as such, but when the military themselves start seeing the same phenomena, they're seeing it over military installations, that's a problem.
When people who have huge experience in judging heights and speeds, when they say these are disc-shaped craft, when they talk about strange rotational motions, the military sits up and takes notice. These sightings were hugely significant.
Many inside the Air Force start to suspect that the unknown craft may be top-secret American technology.
The United States Air Force went through the assumption that they must be dealing with some sort of U.S. domestic military program that people investigating all of this just hadn't been briefed into.
But internal inquiries turn up nothing.
Now, eventually that theory was discarded because after a certain degree of investigation, all the branches of government were brought into this, and they said, no, we don't have anything like that.
Still without answers, Project Sign recruits a number of leading aeronautical experts. Among them, Alfred Loading.
One of the scientists that Project Sign brought aboard was Alfred Loading. His expertise would be instrumental to try and figure out what the UFO phenomena was.
Alfred Loading was an aeronautical engineer who had done pioneering work on disc-shaped and delta-shaped aircraft. Loading was seconded onto this because of his expertise and asked, what is it that we're dealing with here?
Loading and his colleagues are considered some of the greatest technological minds America has to offer.
These people were aeronautical engineers. These people were aviation specialists. These people were physicists. They, better than anyone on the face of the planet, had an idea of what the level of aviation technology was. So when they looked at the UFO reports, they said, look, the speeds, the maneuverability here, the rotation, the strange way in which these things move, we can't do that.
For the leading scientists of the day, it becomes a process of elimination.
This isn't German technology, back engineered. This isn't Soviet stuff. This isn't US domestic. This is above and beyond that. These scientists said, we simply don't have that technology. If it's not us, it must be somebody else. Increasingly and sensationally, parts of the US government started to think the unthinkable.
In the summer of 1947, a wave of UFO sightings forces the government to investigate what is being witnessed in the skies all across the country. Could it be technology created by hostile governments? Or something even more disturbing? Unsealed case file, the Childs Whited incident. July 24th, 1948, Montgomery, Alabama. Chief Pilot Clarence Childs and co-pilot John Whited are flying a DC-3 passenger plane on a routine night flight when Childs spots an object rapidly approaching in the sky.
Now, the pilot saw this craft. He knew it shouldn't be there, and it also did not look like anything that he could really easily recognize. He ends up tapping his co-pilot on the shoulder, telling him to take a look, and then they see this craft travel at an incredible rate of speed from a fairly far distance to nearly right in front of them.
The pilots described the craft as cigar-shaped, with glowing windows on the side.
This thing was closing fast. They almost literally braced for impact, took evasive action, and this object passed rapidly along the side of the aircraft. This is a classic case of trained aviation personnel, pilots, seeing these things and saying this was literally like nothing on Earth.
The near miss is taken seriously by the U.S. government.
I think the military knew that this was a very reliable case. They knew that the witnesses were very reliable themselves. The case truly showed how dangerous this phenomena could be. The pilots knew that they had to take evasive action to not collide with this unidentified craft.
When you're looking at highly trained pilots with nothing to gain and arguably everything to lose by coming out with this sort of thing, in terms of credibility, this is about as good as it gets.
I think the military knew as the commercial flights were going to increase in the coming years and decades, the problem had to be solved. It didn't matter if the UFO was alien or not. The fact that it was there, that a physical craft was there that could potentially cause that collision, bring down an airliner, that's a problem that needs to be fixed.
But according to aeronautics engineer and Project Sign investigator Alfred Loading, the problem is something the Air Force finds hard to accept.
It was Loading who was one of the first people to actually ask, could we be dealing here not with domestic US technology, not with Soviet technology, but with extraterrestrials? And he became one of the first people to really consider what was in later years dubbed the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
The cases that they were investigating, the UFOs, the craft, were performing maneuvers that we essentially couldn't do at the time. And so they really had no other explanation for it.
This near miss put in people's minds for the first time the idea that we're dealing here with not just lights or shapes in the sky, but structured craft with occupants.
These craft are now showing that they can go anywhere and everywhere that they want, that there's absolutely no limitation to it.
To this day, the Childs Whited case remains unidentified.
Later, when people involved in Project Bluebird, like Captain Ruppelt, looked back and said, what are the most compelling cases that we have on our files? This near miss is pretty much at the top of the pile.
The Childs Whited incident leads some experts to consider an unimaginable possibility.
If it isn't us, could it be that some of this is extraterrestrial in technology? Are we being visited?
After a wave of sightings in the 1940s, the U.S. government's UFO investigative body, Project Sign, is tasked with finding an explanation.
And Project Sign investigated numerous reports, brought in scientists to say, what are we dealing with here? And finally, they produced an assessment, an intelligence assessment, known as Estimate of the Situation.
Now, this was a document that essentially outlined their conclusions. It put forward the explanation that the UFO phenomena truly was connected to aliens and extraterrestrials.
To this day, the report has allegedly been seen by only a select few.
Nobody can find it. It mysteriously just simply vanished. Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed all over the place, and the document just doesn't exist.
It was suppressed, it was hidden, maybe it was shredded. This was dynamite.
It marks the beginning of a decades-long denial of the UFO phenomenon.
This was one arm would say, hey, this is true. The other arm would say, no, it's not true.
It really was a tug of war between believers and skeptics, not in the public, but within government. Of those people charged with investigating this phenomenon.
So this document, I think, is probably, if it exists, the most important piece of evidence that would come out of this era.
This was nothing short of those people within the US government charged with investigating UFOs saying, we have investigated and we are being visited. It would be like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying, you know what, all this talk about UFOs, it's real. We're being visited. We're not alone. Can you imagine the public reaction?
Communities around the world rely on policemen and women to ensure safety and security. And if an extraterrestrial threat were to suddenly occur, they would almost certainly be the first to respond.
Police officers are very important witnesses. They're highly trained to be visual, observe, and essentially document their daily routine.
But what happens when they witness a close encounter of the third kind? Unsealed case file. For Socorro, New Mexico. New Mexico State Police Officer Lonnie Zamora is in hot pursuit of a speeding car when something catches his attention.
He saw a strange light in the sky and heard a roaring sound, rather like a rocket.
Zamora breaks off his pursuit of the speeding car and is concerned that the roaring sound is a local dynamite shack exploding. But then he sees an object above him.
He broke off his pursuit and decided to follow this strange object. He lost sight of it for a while, and then when he came over a hill, he encountered this most extraordinary scene of what looked like a spherical or oval-shaped silver object actually on the ground.
He stops his patrol car, gets out of his car, and actually starts to approach the object. He sees it and describes it as this white in color